Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buell. I want to welcome my guest today, Jessika Madison-Kennedy. She is an independent rehabilitator in Minnesota, and I can't wait for you to meet her and listen to all of the things that she knows about Northern Cardinals. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it. Okay, I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a long time, Jessika. We are going to talk about Northern Cardinals today. I love this bird, but I have to admit, I really don't know as much as I probably should about this bird. But before we get into Northern Cardinals, I thought we would start with your origin story. How did you get to where you are right now in wildlife rehabilitation?
Hi, I'm really glad to be here today, Gail. I actually, for some years, was working in fashion design, and I had a showroom in New York. This was right about the time of the 2007, 2008 recession.
Mhm.
And my showroom rep was pushing me towards fast fashion, and I was getting really frustrated with the industry. So at that time, I started working teaching fashion at the College of Visual Arts in St. Paul, which, of course, is an academic year type situation.
Mhm.
And I decided, because of my love of birds, I would spend my summers doing wildlife rehabilitation. And that's kind of what kicked it all off. I wanted a change of scenery. I wanted to do something different. And I had that window of time to kind of get started into it.
Wow, you chose something really different
I
from
did. I needed
fashion
to be
design.
yeah, I needed a break from that. So I was teaching and doing birds. It was the perfect balance of science and the arts.
Science and the arts. I love it. I absolutely love it. Another reason I'm so excited that you are on the podcast is that you have helped write two chapters, co-authored two chapters in the Hand Rearing Birds, second edition, that is edited by Dr. Rebecca Dewar and Lori Gage. And this book should be on everybody's shelf if you are doing birds at all, especially hand rearing birds. And you have two chapters in there. You have chapter 10 is on grebes, and you co authored that with Dr. Rebecca Dewar. And chapter 49 is on grosbeaks and cardinals that you did with Veronica Bowers. We are speaking to the expert here on Northern Cardinals. I'm so excited. I'll bring that book up again later. We can talk about it and talk about, maybe some specifics in the chapter. But that book should be on everybody's shelf. So, Northern Cardinals. Let's start with natural history. So, what is the range of a Northern Cardinal in North America?
Right. So the interesting thing about northern cardinals is they're actually a southern bird, and their range um, it didn't even reach Minnesota, which is where we are recording from, until probably the 1930s. So
Wow.
yeah, they are in Mexico, the southeast. And as you know, scientists think that because of climate change and also people
Hmm.
putting out bird feeders around the turn of the century, cardinals started to creep more northward. And as of now, they reach up to Ontario. S-
Wow. I
Yeah,
mean, you see them on Christmas cards. Of course, around here in Minnesota in the wintertime, they are this most stunning bird against the white snow. And so, of course, and of course, I'm from Minnesota. So that's why I think Minnesota birds all the time. I knew
right.
that they were expanding the range, but I didn't realize it was that far.
Yeah, and they are, they are now Minnesota birds, but the reason they're called northern cardinals is because there are like six other species of cardinal in the south that are more southern than the northern cardinal. So this one is the most northern of all the cardinals.
The most northern. And isn't that interesting with other species of cardinals that we don't have those other species here? We just have the northern cardinal.
Right, and now scientists are debating whether they should divide the northern cardinal into multiple subspecies because they
Oh,
are so.
really?
Yeah, they are starting to exhibit different vocal patterns, which they compare it to like one speaks German and the other Portuguese. It's that different. So they're not,
Wow.
yeah, they're not interbreeding these certain groups and they're not quite fitting the criteria yet, but it's on the horizon where they may start breaking them up.
That is so interesting because I know about regional dialects for species, where on this side of the mountain they speak with a southern accent, and on this side they speak with a northern accent or something. But they're still the same species, and their vocalizations aren't so different that they're speaking a completely different language. That is fascinating.
Yeah, and vocalization is really a big piece of what I've learned about cardinals because there's a lot more to it than I think we realize. So, for example, when they're trying to establish a territory, a
Hmm.
young Northern Cardinal will make a point to memorize the song of an elder male versus a younger male because they learn from the males around them. And his idea, this is what they think, we don't know this, but it's suspected. The idea is the cardinal is trying to say, I'm also an older male, so I'm talking like this older male, so that other
Huh.
cardinals won't infringe on the territory.
Isn't that interesting? The
Yeah.
strategies that are out there and how they developed over time. Wow. Okay, so they go all the way up to Ontario and all the
Yes.
way down to Mexico. So they're a very common bird. They're a very beloved bird, that's for sure. A lot of people who have backyard bird feeders, that's probably an easily identifiable bird. But why don't you describe what they look like?
Yeah, well, they look like a little bird wearing a Catholic cardinal outfit, and that's why they're called cardinals. It's a bright red bird. The male is bright red with a black face and an orange beak, and he has a pointy crest, um,
Mhm.
solid red. The females are sort of an olive colored with little tinges of red and olive green. And they get their coloring from carotenoids in the food that they eat. So,
Oh, I love that because I know a lot of birds that are, well, flamingos, which are pink, they get their color from the food that they eat. And I did not realize that from cardinals, that they also
yeah,
get their coloring from the food. That's
yeah.
great. It's really
And
cool.
the coloring, of course, the stronger the shade of red, it sort of signals that that is a healthier bird with more access to resources. So
Sure.
the brightness of the red on the male is, important when mate selection comes up.
Now they don't have an eclipse, what's called an eclipse plumage, do they? They just have the one plumage. They have it all year. They molt once a year.
Yes, they
Okay.
molt once a year. They go through a submolt on their first year.
Okay. Okay.
So they, the young birds, as they start to develop, they pretty quickly start showing if it's going to be a male or a female because the males get these bright red feathers kind of scattered over their body. So
Okay.
their sex is pretty easy to identify in the first year. And then
Oh, okay.
after their first molt, then during that winter they will start to develop their adult plumage.
Okay. Okay. And then they're ready to breed and everything that very next year.
Yes. A lot of people will ask about the bald cardinals because it's quite a common sight, right? To see
Yes.
a cardinal with no head feathers. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not usually an issue. It's molting, just molting that is happening at that time, of year. And it can be troublesome if the weather is cold and he's exposed to too much cold, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not parasites typically or anything like that. It's just molting.
Just molting all the head feathers all at once.
Yes. But their body molts are strategic, so they'll molt in a symmetric manner. So they'll lose the outermost tail feathers
Mm-hmm.
first, and then not the ones next to it, but the ones in the middle. So it's like every other or every third feather in a
Mm-hmm.
symmetric way, so that as new feathers grow in, they're protected by either older feathers that are about to molt out
Right.
or
Right.
feathers that have recently grown in.
And then do they, so like some species of birds don't do a full molt every year. They'll do part one year, the next year they'll do the rest of it because of course molting is very energy intensive. Do cardinals do that or do they in general molt everything or at least their flight feathers every
Yeah.
year?
I believe they molt every year, pretty
Okay.
much. The only time molting can get disrupted is if, especially late breeding season. They're kind of famous for trying to fit in one last nest at the end of the year, which as rehabilitators, we don't love that.
That's for sure.
But they do. They're like, oh yeah, we'll do one more. They're commonly predated just because of their nest location being, they like to nest in low shrubs and bushes, or if it's a tree, they're a little lower down, so maybe 4 to 10 feet, and it's an
Okay.
up nest. So,
Okay.
typically nests that are not cavity nests are more likely to be predated, and the numbers are pretty poor for survival, and that is why cardinals will do 2 to 3 broods a year if they can.
If they can. And each brood is about how many chicks?
Um,
4, 5,
yeah,
3?
that's typically it can be less too. I've even heard of one,
Wow.
but typically, yeah, I think 3 to 5 would be a good estimate.
Okay. And then you said open cup nest, so it's a little stick nest, or is it got, how robins, excuse me, robins have kind of mud mixed into their nest? These guys are mostly stick nests.
Yeah, mostly sticks or whatever fibers they can find. Probably straw, more soft fibers. The size is
Okay.
about like a robin's nest.
Okay. Okay.
Mud, really, they will just sort of kind of your standard bird nest that you imagine in your head when you think of a bird nest is
Okay.
what they do. Yeah.
Okay. So what do they like to eat?
They're omnivores. They like to eat a little bit of everything. So they eat insects, particularly during the breeding season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And in the winters, they focus a little more on berries and seeds. But all year round, they eat grasses, seeds, multiple. I think I saw that they have about 77 types of vegetation that they'll consume.
Wow.
They
That's
have
pretty cool.
favorites. Yeah, they have favorites. So they prefer like raspberries, red and blueberries, all kinds of insects, moths. Their favorite seed is sunflower seeds. I think a lot of
Hmm.
people know that. They'll fill their
Hmm.
feeders, and that is by far their favorite seed. But
Hmm.
in general, their diet is about 70% insects and about 30% plant matter. And this does shift depending on the time of year.
Because in the winter, especially like in a place like Minnesota, insects are around, but they're harder to find and harder to get to. Um, yeah, you just assume when you look at a cardinal's beak because they have that kind of conical beak that it's just for seeds. But
Right.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, but they're not. So that's really interesting. And that definitely will play in on raising babies, which we will talk about in just a little bit. So, boy, so habitat. What kind of habitat do they like?
They are really versatile for habitat, and that is one of the reasons why they are expanding their range because they they tend to fit in really well to the type of habitats that humans create. So shrubs and like higher canopies aren't really where they spend their time. They spend their time lower on the ground. So
Mm-hmm.
bushes and shrubs, and then some degree of open spaces,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of canopy, but there's a lot of versatility. So a cardinal can do really well in a suburban setting, and
Mm-hmm.
they tend to actually, the range, we believe it got expanded partly because of humans kind of
Mm-hmm.
creating habitats that are a little more ideal for them than just the natural meadows and prairies and woods that were there before.
And so I would imagine then predators of cardinals would be cats, maybe
Yes.
some dogs, things like Cooper's hawks.
Yeah.
Um, what else? I mean, you said nest predation, so we're talking about squirrels going to get eggs and anything else that might be opportunistic finding a nest. But what else? What else am I missing there for predators?
Snakes and raccoons. Um,
Ah,
Also larger birds, so maybe jays and crows.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Total sense. Total
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. So, when you mentioned earlier that they don't have good survival, from being a chick, is it like a lot of, other types of birds where I've read anywhere between 50 and 75% don't make it to their first birthday? Is it similar to that?
I mean, who knows if this is really, I don't know how accurate it can be, but yeah, 20% survive the first year is
Wow.
I saw. And
Wow.
after that, only 40% each year once they are adults. So the odds are definitely stacked against them.
Yeah, it's so interesting, especially being so versatile, and adaptable. You think that their survival rate would be a little bit higher than that. So, how long do they live?
About 2 to 4 years is typical, but of course there's always outliers and there's
Mhm.
one that's recorded living 15 years. So we know they can physically live a long time, but just the environment, I think they have a hard life, and so the lifespan is small because of that.
Yeah, and you would, especially because they're in suburban areas and urban areas, you would think in some ways it would be easier because of bird feeders and things like that, but it's not necessarily true. Not necessarily true.
Well, there's
Wow.
a belief that the bird feeders actually make a difference for a lot of these.
Hmm.
It really helps a lot of them survive because many die of starvation in the winter.
Oh,
Um,
that's true. That's true. And I know they've done some studies on chickadees, that winter food source can really make the difference between life or death.
exactly. And then, of course, we have house cats, which kind of pushes the balance the other way. So I think it's a mixed bag as far as living around human activity.
Right, especially if you're a bird that lives closer to the ground. If you're a warbler and you're living way at the tree canopy, well,
Yeah.
and most of them are not nesting in urban environments, but they're still a lot higher up and harder to reach if you're a house cat.
Yeah, exactly.
Already you're starting to touch on why they come into care, but why do we'll start broad and then get down to youngsters, but broadly, why do cardinals come into care for rehabilitators?
Right. Well, I think, the reason we see them is first and foremost, they are living around people and people pay attention to cardinals. They're bright red birds, they're noisy.
Hmm.
People, if they have a cardinal nest in their yard, they're paying attention to it. And so if there's anything going wrong, someone's likely to see it and bring it into rehabilitation.
Hmm.
But the reasons they're brought in tend to be cat attacks, window collisions. So they'll
Hmm.
fly into their reflection. Um, and, those are truly the main ones, collisions and animal attacks.
So, speaking about windows, so window collisions, and certainly I have heard, and the robins do this too, that cardinals are one of those birds that the males will kind of go after, windows and side mirrors on cars and things like that during the breeding season. Is that mostly because of I'm being territorial and you are in my territory? So get out and the reflection, trying to chase the reflection away.
That's exactly what it is. They are very territorial during the breeding season, and the males, part of the reason they're singing in the mornings and at dusk is to announce that this is my territory. Most cardinals have about 2 acres, which is roughly one city block, that they consider
Okay.
theirs, and they will
Oh,
defend their territory in the breeding season. This, of
okay.
course, changes during the off season. So in the winters, they will flock and drop the territory thing doesn't apply in the winter. It's only when they're nesting and taking care of their young.
Okay. Do they stay in family groups in the wintertime? Do you know?
They often do. They spend not just family groups, but they'll also kind of flock up with other species. So cedar waxwings, chickadees, other birds. They'll move
Interesting.
around and they do this for safety. So if there's predators, there's a lot more eyes and ears on the situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Makes total sense. Do they, I've gone back to natural history. How long does a pair stay together? Is it just one season? Is it the male creates the territory, so then he is calling for the female in? Does he grab a different female every year? Do we know?
Yeah, we do know the thing about cardinals that I especially find interesting is they're one of the most studied songbirds. So there's a lot of information on this bird, and they've done a lot on the breeding and the mating, and they're monogamous and they'll stay with their mate for a full season.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they'll stay with that same mate for a couple seasons and
Mm-hmm.
maybe even longer, but then they might also change mates if what they consider to be a better mate comes up, but they do stay monogamous during the breeding season in most cases. However,
Okay.
they've discovered that maybe 20% of offspring are from outside. So there's a little bit of, laxity to that.
Those naughty males.
Yes. Well, it's the females too, though, because they also
Oh,
have to be in agreement. They have to accept the male, otherwise he can't access what he needs to access. Right.
okay.
It's
Right.
two cardinals kind of doing something off on the side, basically.
Sure. Um, speaking about that, especially since she also has a choice in the matter, is there courtship behaviors? I'm back on natural history.
Yes, no, this is really interesting. So the male does a really funky dance
Hmm.
to impress the female. You can find videos of it. It's pretty funny. He does this dramatic little display dance, and then they also sing duets together.
Oh, that is so fun.
And he brings
Um,
bugs instead of flowers. So yeah, there's a degree of courtship that
okay.
goes on with the cardinals.
Okay. Does the female make the nest then? Or do they both nest make?
She builds the nest typically, and she's the one that spends most of the time at the nest because he's bright red, so it makes sense for him to kind of keep a distance.
Yep.
But one thing he will do is visit the nest quickly and feed her, so
Hmm.
she doesn't have to spend time getting food. She can focus
Okay.
on building the nest.
Okay. And hence probably one of the courtship things, hey, can you provide me with food? Thank you very much. There's a
Yeah,
lot of birds that do that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. Now we can pop back down to why they come into care. So we know cats are one of the reasons. Windows are another reason. I would imagine because they're in the urban environment, cars, vehicles in general are another reason. Anything I'm missing?
They can get illnesses, of course. The adults can get conjunctivitis, pox, things like that can happen to them. Although I really do feel like collisions are one of the main ones for adults
Okay.
and
Okay.
cats. The babies, it's different. A lot of times they're orphaned because of nest failure.
Okay. So nest failure, meaning the nest comes out of the bush, or the adults get killed, or all of the above.
The above, predation, the bird that I got yesterday was found by someone who was walking on a trail, and the nest was on the ground. All the birds were dead but one, so she rescued the last little baby bird and brought it into care. So that's an example of the nest probably being predated. Uh,
Ah, okay.
yeah.
Okay. How many cardinals do you get in a year generally?
I maybe get one or two a year. Right now I'm doing independent rehabilitation and I try to focus on the birds that don't do well at the local wildlife hospital.
Hmm.
So I will usually divert birds like cardinals there because they're equipped to raise birds like that, whereas hummingbirds are a little more difficult for a large center to keep on top of. So
Hmm.
I don't get as many as maybe I would if I were taking all of the species most of the time.
Oh, sure. Well, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about how to raise them and what to raise them on. And in fact, the next question that I have is, since we're talking about youngsters now, is how do you age, um, and this will get into fledging and all those different kinds of questions and when they're on their own in the wild. But how do you age a cardinal?
Well, they hatch around 3 to 5 grams and they fledge about 13 days after hatching, nine
Okay.
13 days. So they grow up pretty fast.
Hmm.
Their final weight is about 50 grams. So
Okay.
you can there's a lot of resource out there as far as visual images where you can look at their visual development,
Hmm.
as far as pin feathers growing in, but weight is a great way to kind of kind of guess at what their age is. As
Okay.
that's such a large weight gain in a short amount of time. So you can
Right.
look at that weight and sort of roughly divide it by the amount of days and get a pretty good estimation of their age.
So that's kind of about aging them, right? And there's lots of resources online so you can see what they look like, but the weight and about how much should they be gaining in every day? I mean, if they're leaving it or they're fledging at about 50 grams and they start out between 3 and 5, hoy, that's a lot of weight gain, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a straight, even. graph of weight gain, but
Hmm.
I like to see like 2 grams a day at least.
Okay.
I don't really go by weight so much. I go by body condition. So I
Okay.
check the keel bone and the breast tissue on either side. Of course,
Okay.
weight is important and I use that as well, but I definitely look at their body condition primarily because that's really what indicates how well they're doing.
Why don't we get into diet?
Yeah.
So, what are you feeding and when?
Well, right. So when they're first hatching, we want them to be on an all insect diet, which is the case for most songbirds. And that is 100% insects with a little bit of supplementation. And that is documented in the book that we were talking about, Hand Rearing Birds.
Hmm.
Um, it's a diet that was devised by Janine Perlman, and Veronica Bowers also has this diet, a version of this diet in her book. So it is vitamins and minerals. Basically, there's an oil, a, a vitamin oil, and calcium and some other minerals that are put together in certain proportions. And then this is given in addition to the insects that they're fed. The reason that we do the supplementation is we're feeding them crickets, mealworms, grubs, a small variety of insects. And the variety of insects that the parent birds are feeding the young in the wild is very vast, and we know that they're getting a lot of micronutrients that we are not getting out of our
Right.
insects.
Hmm. So you're feeding them all insects with the supplementation, which we can find the book, Veronica Bauer's book is Passerine Fundamentals. And I know it's kind of hard to find right now. So hopefully she's working on an updated version because I know that that book is difficult to find. But the hand rearing birds, the second edition book is not hard to find. That one is available, and that recipe is in that book too on your chapter of grosbeaks and cardinals. So, okay,
Yes,
excellent.
that's so in the book. And as the birds grow up, when they start to fledge, then we start to introduce other foods. So we introduce berries, seeds as they get a little bit older, and start to diversify the diet to include more plant material.
Do you start doing that when they are starting to eat a little bit more on their own? And then you continue to feed them insects, but then they get this other stuff where they can explore?
Yeah, it's a gradual process. I tend to introduce it once they have fledged, which means they're perching and starting to flap their wings a little bit. That's when I start to just slowly introduce it because you don't want to make an abrupt change in the diet. So
Mhm.
I will introduce a little bit of berries. You can do peanut butter, things, other things. So you're doing nuts and seeds, but at this age, you want it pretty broken up and crushed up. And
Okay.
once they start playing with foraging for food, then you can start presenting, like seeds and berries in their natural form.
So are you presenting these in on the floor of the cage in like peanut butter jar caps, or is it another way, hanging off a branch, or how do you present this stuff?
Yeah, all of the above. So I feel like a good approach is you begin by just introducing them to the food. In captivity, we will put the food in little dishes on the ground,
Hmm.
or I like to clip them up on the perches because that I find that young cardinals are a little more willing to explore off the ground. They have a natural sense of
Okay.
ground and kind of keeping in the foliage, low foliage. So I always set up their habitat with natural branches. And then I'll take those little binder clips and clip a peanut butter jar lid up in the branches with food that they can find.
Okay.
And as the bird starts to learn how to eat out of the dish, then I expand it to try to mimic what they would find in the wild. This is really important for them because in the wild, when a cardinal fledges the nest, they spend probably about 40 to 50 days following their parents around.
Oh,
And
wow. That's quite
long
a long time.
a long time. And people in rehabilitation sometimes are anxious to get the bird out, but they really do need a lot of support. And in the wild, they stick with their parents and learn how to find food. So it's important that we set them up for success and do our best to kind of mimic what they would find in the wild. So what I'll do is cut up berries and stick it on a branch to mimic something that would be naturally growing in a bush. Um,
Okay.
Scatter insects. You can take like hollowed out little logs, small logs, and kind of put bugs in it. The more
Mm-hmm.
naturalistic it is, the better. And I also really advocate for soft release when you do finally release the bird because they do better when they're in a habitat that they're familiar with.
Okay. Okay. And we'll talk about release in a little bit, but that's a nice little teaser there on, but that amount of time is also, I don't want to say not surprising, but it is surprising that it is quite a long time that they need support from their parents while they're learning. It also does make sense because, like you said, they're omnivores. They eat a lot of different things and they need to learn what to eat and what not to eat. And the adults will help them with that. All right, so we're going to stick with food for the moment. And so when they're uh just like other songbirds, I'm assuming, is that if you get them in really young, you're feeding them about every 15 minutes, waiting for the crop to pass before you are feeding them again. Is there any tips or tricks or anything to get them to gape or open their mouth for you? Or or maybe we should back up because when they come in, you're not necessarily feeding them right away. So let's say a young cardinal, just like this one that you got last night, came in. What are the first things that you do?
Right. The very first thing I do is I give it a very quick glance for any serious injuries that it could have, anything that is critical and needs immediate attention.
Hmm.
In most cases, though, what you want to do, provided the bird is not bleeding or, having a major issue, is you put it somewhere quiet and dark and warm so the bird can de-stress and get the body temperature to a natural temperature because typically they've been out of the nest and are a little cooler than they should be. So,
Hmm.
very first thing is to get the bird warm. You can check the temperature by putting their body up against your wrist, and they should feel warm, not hot, not cool, but warm. And
Hmm.
once they've have spent maybe 15, 20 minutes in a quiet, dark, warm place and their body is warm, then you should hydrate the bird. In rehabilitation, we always assume that a bird that comes in is dehydrated. So
Hmm.
what I do is I will give either oral or subcutaneous LRS. If you don't
Hmm.
have lactated ringer solution, you can also do oral Pedialyte. You wouldn't do that
Hmm.
subcu, but you could give that orally. And I will give maybe a baby cardinal about 0.3 milliliters.
Hmm.
Want to start slow because you don't want them to aspirate. So you want to get a feel for how the bird is
Hmm.
drinking, if it will take the fluids easily.
Hmm.
But I will do that maybe every 15 minutes, and it usually takes 1 to 2 doses, and then I'll get a dropping. And that very first dropping is my indication that the GI tract is moving and the bird is
Hmm.
ready to be fed its first meal.
Oh, that's great. That's great. It's all about the poop. I swear. It's all about the poop. So when you are giving let's say you're doing it orally,
Yes.
not subcutaneous IV or not IV fluids, lactated ringers. Let's say you're giving it orally. What does that look like? The bird opens up his mouth and you're putting this syringe, this 1 cc syringe with no needle, back in the back of the mouth, avoiding the hole at the back of the tongue.
Yeah, that's
Is that what this looks like?
It's exactly what it should look like, right? So you want to put that syringe in, like you said, deep because you want to bypass that glottis, which
Hmm.
doesn't have an epiglottis. Birds have an exposed glottis, so we do take care to put it far back in the mouth. And, ideally the bird is gaping because they want to be fed, but on occasion you will get a bird that is not opening its mouth for you. So in that situation, you make sure it is warm. Um, I will take the syringe and maybe put just a drop of fluids on the edge of the closed beak. And typically, what will happen is the bird will like suck that little drop into the mouth. And you
Hmm.
can begin like that. Usually, what will happen is after they have a few drops kind of sucked in the side of the beak, they will open up for you.
Hmm.
And if there's a problem and the bird will not open its beak, maybe there's probably something else going on. In that case, I would definitely only give subcutaneous fluids. And if
Hmm.
I didn't have subcutaneous fluids at hand, I would gavage oral fluids, but I would make sure to gavage just a small amount in this, down into the deep down into the bird's crop.
Right. So explain gavage.
So gavage is like a metal tube with a hole on the end. It's a rounded tip, so it's not sharp. And what you do is you extend the neck and you put this down. If birds have a crop, you put the fluids right into the crop. And if they have no crop, then you would put it, down as far as it goes. But usually
Hmm.
you will, easily find the end point because you'll hit resistance.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
don't want to force the gavage needle. You want to sort of let it fall, gently fall down is how I like to describe it.
Hmm. Hmm. And then you give that little bit, and then you're hoping that as the bird absorbs that, it starts feeling a little bit better, and then will gape for you. Right.
Then
Okay.
if they don't gape for you, there's something else going on. So then you have to investigate what it is. But unless the bird is having its system shut down, typically they will eventually gape.
Hmm. But the very first thing you do is make sure the bird is warm.
Yes, number
Yeah.
one, make sure the bird is warm. You never want to give fluids to a cold bird. It's actually harder on their system to try to digest fluids when the
Hmm.
bird is not warm. So, people always worry they want to get food into the bird first thing, but it's really important. Warmth first. Once they're warm, hydration. Once they're warm and hydrated, then you can introduce food.
Okay. Excellent. Really good like mantra to remember for pretty much all wildlife rehabilitation, not just songbirds.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and the cool thing about cardinals in a way is how average they are in a sense as far as songbirds go, is they're like most songbirds that we get. They're not that unusual to the others. The thing that sets cardinals apart is they're so popular in, sort of the collective mind that they have had a lot of research done on them. So it's pretty cool
right.
about bird, and we can apply that to a lot of species, assuming that there's similarities.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So you got your bird in, you've warmed it up, you've given it fluids. Now what?
Yeah, so now we are just feeding this bird mealworms or crickets typically. And, like we all always like to say with natural history, pay attention to what they do in the wild. So the parents will get insects and they'll kind of mush them up in their beak before they feed it to the baby.
Hmm.
So that's what I do when I have a young baby bird is I kind
You
of
mush it up in your mouth?
no.
I just thought I'd better clarify.
Yeah, I should be clear about that. No, I use a hemostat. That we definitely don't put it in the mouth. I mush it up with the hemostat, crush it
Okay.
open a little bit, feed them a variety of mealworms, crickets, grubs,
Hmm.
and of course the supplementation. But
Hmm.
I feed the young ones maybe every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, and as they age, I expand that window of time to
Hmm.
minutes and so on and so on.
And then when they start to branch, then that's when you're introducing some of those other foods in a nice small amounts, and in different places above the floor of the cage. So,
Yeah,
um,
exactly. And
excellent.
cardinals are, they have this beak that is designed to crack open husks of seeds.
Hmm.
Like sunflower seeds are their favorite. And what they will do is when they start to play with foraging for food, they will look like they're eating, but they're not actually eating. They're just practicing. And
Oh.
seed, they'll move it around in their beak and they'll drop it. So a common mistake is to assume that they are eating when they're not quite eating yet. It takes them a long time. It's a skill. They have to
Hmm.
kind of, if you ever watch a cardinal, they put the seed in their mouth and then they shift it around and they turn it around and they have a certain way of working the seed to get that shell to crack. Uh,
Hmm.
and this takes a long time. They're really slow at getting this. So they do spend a lot of time kind of learning how to be an adult.
Right, right. And especially since in captivity, my guess is it may take a little longer unless you have lots of young cardinals that they can watch each other. But they're watching the adults in the wild and they're watching the adults do this. And they can probably learn quicker in the wild than they do with us.
Yeah, they definitely do. And when I was reading a lot about the studies that they do, I realized how detailed, their fledging experience is. the male and the female split the chicks up. So the male takes half and the female takes half. And
Really?
yeah, they split them up and they go out and show, they go out with their parent and spend like weeks following their mom or their dad around, learning this is where the berries are and this is where this is. And, um, there's just a lot to it. So rehabilitated cardinals are at a huge disadvantage. And
Hmm.
that's why I advocate for soft release, because if you are releasing the bird, like for example, I have an outdoor aviary, I will raise the bird in that aviary and then open the door one day and let them
Hmm.
come and go. So they will know that there's food inside.
Hmm.
While they get to know the outside food sources, they always can kind of return to this known source because that's what they've been taught. And then as they get familiar with the surrounding area, of course, they always tend to expand their range and leave the aviary once and for all.
Oh yeah, so they kind of wean themselves off. So
Yeah,
it's kind
yeah,
of the opposite, instead of, you following the parent, the food source stays in one spot and then
right.
you can come and go and learn how to do it. Yeah, there's a lot of good papers and stuff on soft releases for lots of different types of animals. It
Yeah.
really helps them a lot. So let's talk about, unless there's something that I'm missing here with diet, let's talk about housing.
Diet is pretty well covered. They eat all kinds of things, plants,
Hmm.
insects, seeds or plants, but like berries, seeds, all these things. So they have a really diverse diet and they forage. They spend time foraging on the ground for like grass seeds too.
Hmm.
And then they forage a lot in shrubs and bushes. They tend to spend less time up in the canopy. So I think
Okay.
kind of releasing them into a habitat that is more suited to lower growing plants.
Hmm.
That is a little more appropriate for a cardinal.
So the food that you're feeding when they're kind of fledging and you're giving them additional food beside the insects. So we've covered berries. So it'd be blueberries, it would be strawberries, it might be blackberries or other kinds of berries. It would be some sunflower seeds, seeds that have shells, seeds that don't have shells. It would be some peanuts and those types of nuts, maybe crushed up into small little pieces. Would you feed grass seed?
Um, I would put it in their enclosure so that they could forage for it. I probably wouldn't feed it, like actually put it to the bird's mouth because that's a little tedious, but grass
Hmm.
seed is something they forage for, and it's like a smart weed, kind of
Hmm.
things we consider to be weeds that have little seed heads on them. That is
Hmm.
something that they eat a fair amount of. So I
Okay.
would definitely include that in their, like I'll dig some up and put it in like a little pot and put it in the enclosure so that they can explore and get to know a lot
Oh,
more.
that's cool. So you'd actually plant it.
Yep, I actually
Um,
plant it. Yeah.
okay. So of course, as everybody should know, if they're going out and buying grass seed, they better make sure it's not coated with pesticides or anything like that or herbicides. So
Yes.
be very careful if you're buying grass seed, or
Yeah.
any kind of seed, that
Right.
isn't specifically marketed for birds. So okay, what other things might one put in there that I might not think about? I wouldn't have thought about grass seed.
Yeah, so I like to make sure they have a lot of branches because they do most of their foraging in the trees and bushes and things like that. So one of my favorite ways to kind of set this up is I will take a gallon water jug, fill it
Hmm.
with water, and then trim like some trees nearby, and I'll stick it in that gallon jug. So the jug is heavy, it's bottom weighted because it's full of water. It's a gallon of
Hmm.
water. And then you have the small opening at the top, which kind of acts like a vase, and you
Hmm.
have your tree in it. So then your large branch or small tree, whatever,
Hmm.
is kept alive a little bit longer.
Okay,
Yep.
and then you can just attach the containers and that you're going to feed. And I
Yeah.
liked what you said earlier about, like, skewering, strawberries or blueberries or whatever, so they can forage more naturally. So,
Yes. So I'll
Okay.
do that. I'll put live insects in the enclosure. Like I'll find a piece of bark that's kind of rotten and use that as a dish for put some mealworms in there. I'll take crickets that are frozen and thawed out so they're not alive, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll stick them to the branches with a little dab of peanut butter.
Oh, okay. I like it.
Yeah, create foraging opportunities for the cardinals.
Hmm.
And the grass seed, when we were talking about that, I don't actually get the seeds, but I'll dig up because I have a garden and I don't use any pesticides and I get
Hmm.
weeds. So I will dig up a weed and rather than just pull it up, I'll dig it up a little carefully and put it
Hmm.
in a small pot and put it in the enclosure.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Instead of just pulling them.
I mean, this is the ideal way to do this for every species, right? Is to create a natural habitat. So
Hmm.
a lot of species can benefit from this if you're housing birds together. And in fact, it's really important to try to never raise a single bird. You always want to try to get conspecifics with that bird. So if I have a single cardinal, I'll transfer it to the wildlife hospital so they can be around other birds, hopefully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
conspecifics. And then until you can do that, do you use things like mirrors and things?
I do, but with cardinals, another thing that I'd like to point out is I make sure that they can hear other cardinals sing, especially local cardinals. So, for example,
Oh,
this morning I had my brooder outside on my deck because there's a cardinal singing in the tree. And this
okay.
is really critical for probably a lot of species, but we know for cardinals for sure. They start learning song after the first 3 weeks. They start practicing
Okay.
singing, and they listen and learn. And the funny thing about them is they practice quietly to themselves because they don't want
Ah,
I mean, I'm assuming I'm guessing here. It's like they don't want anyone to hear it till it's perfect. That's how it
we'll
appears.
think that. I like that. I like
Yeah.
that.
They actually practice quietly, so they're very softly singing. And
Mhm.
then once they feel they have the song, they will introduce it loudly out in the branches.
My God, that is so awesome. That is really awesome.
And another
Um,
thing I have to say
mhm.
is the female cardinal sings a little more than the male even, which is really rare.
Huh. So they can pick up now the cardinal songs. Does she, the female, since they do duets, is she singing the same song that he is, or is she singing something slightly different?
She will match his song. So the duet is sort of like a coming together an agreement, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
They will match songs, and each male has his own version of the song, which to our ears feels almost the same. But there's kind of a formula that ornithologists are kind of starting to recognize. Like they never sing a single note, they always group the notes together,
Mm-hmm.
call them
Wow.
phrases. So there's a lot more to the song than I think we realize. And not just the song, but the calls and chirps. There's a lot of meanings. So there's a language, right? And there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
communication. And
Mm-hmm.
wildlife rehabilitation, we deny them of that opportunity to learn in that natural way. So one thing I do is I try to expose them to local bird sounds because another thing we've learned is cardinals have accents and territories. So I want any cardinals I raise in this area to sound
Mm-hmm.
close to the other ones in this area.
Mm-hmm.
I will record. You can get recordings off Cornell, which are fantastic. You can navigate to the website and search for Cardinal Song, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can find songs to play. But what is even better is to record a local bird, maybe on your phone, and then use that song to play to your baby as it
Well, that
grows.
makes sense. It makes sense because, like you said, local dialects, local songs, it's going to be different here than it's going to be in Minnesota. It's going to be different than in Wisconsin, and even more locally, it's going to be different. So I think that that is an excellent pro tip right there, um, especially since most of us have cardinals around.
Yeah, and they're loud, right? They start in the morning and you can't miss the cardinal singing. You know, they are letting everyone know this is their territory and this is their song. And there's a lot of belief that their quality of their song helps with their breeding opportunities. So you do want to make sure that your bird has a chance to learn a song.
Right, right. Yeah, because why do we have these birds? Why do we want to get them back out? We want to get them back out so they can live their life, part of their life is breeding and raising more cardinals in this
Exactly.
case. So we
Yeah.
want to give them the best chance possible. So, and we've known for a long time that birds learn their songs, and they have to hear them and they can pick them out. So like you said, like you've got this bird on your deck listening, and it can pick out the cardinal song from all the other bird song that it's hearing.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's
Hmm.
really cool.
Yeah, just nature is so cool.
Yeah, and they have calls that they do. So as the female is in the nest, she will call to the male to let him know whether to come bring food or not. Maybe they don't need it yet because
Okay.
nesting, the male is a little bit of a liability. He's bright red and he's
Right.
out to predators. So the strategy that cardinals seem to have is he will visit the nest, but he'll make quick, short visits to drop off food. Otherwise,
Okay.
he keeps away. And one thing he will do is kind of watch nearby and let the female and the chicks know if there's a predator. So
Ah, okay.
chicks know not to beg. They know to get quiet and wait. So they
Hmm.
actually are, communicating, and even the chicks can understand some of the communication.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Yeah, interesting strategy because you're right. They're bright red. The males are bright red. Can
Right.
be seen almost everywhere.
And I think that the reason so much research has been done on these birds is they're striking, beautiful red birds.
Hmm.
And if you think about it, as their range expanded, imagine seeing a cardinal for the first time if it had never been where you live. Because there was a point in history in Minnesota where we wouldn't have seen a cardinal.
Right.
And, then suddenly cardinals show up in the 1930s or whatever. That's
Hmm. Hmm.
pretty striking. And then they stick around all winter. So we have the dull, drab winter and we have these beautiful red birds. I think that's
Right.
why they captured sort of the public's attention and got all this research. People are just interested in this bird.
Right.
It's,
And it might be the first one that you learned how to identify because of
yeah.
that color.
There
So,
is a quote that I read, and it said, "The male northern cardinal is perhaps responsible for getting more people to open up a field guide than any other bird."
I believe it. I believe it. I've heard more people talk about, oh, I know about the cardinals in my backyard.
Yeah.
Sometimes blue jays are up there too, but cardinals, robins, blue jays, but cardinals in particular is often the very first bird that someone will tell me. And yeah, you're right. They are striking. They're gorgeous. And I'm glad we're talking about them today.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know how many research studies there were until I started to kind of prepare to write this chapter for the book. I wanted
Hmm.
to, take everything I knew, but also make sure there was nothing I was missing that would be valuable to add. And I'm
Hmm.
just astounded by how many studies have been focused on, everything from they do DNA studies. That's how they know that birds were not being monogamous because they took DNA from the parents and the chicks in like
Uh-huh.
multiple nests. So the
Hmm.
studies are pretty in depth and they teach us a lot.
Wow. And in that chapter, I think you've got a lot of those studies referenced, don't you?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I referenced some of, I mean, there's so much out there. I didn't use all of the information in the
Hmm.
chapter to reference the
Hmm.
ones that I used, but just in general, there were so many studies that it's kind of incredible. Um,
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah,
that goes
that's very
to
cool.
show why the Northern Cardinal, it a little factoid is it is the most popular state bird. There's 7 states that have claimed the cardinal.
You can see why. You could
Yeah,
totally see why.
yes.
So, not in Minnesota, but you know.
No, no, but there's 7 states that all decided that cardinal is the bird for them.
Thanks to my guest today, Jessika Madison-Kennedy, for this great discussion on northern cardinals. What a fantastic bird. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians to support them to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buell. I'm the partnership coordinator for Partners for Wildlife with the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. Our producer is Reese Rosato.